Hey guys, how you doing today? I'm here with the video showing you how to replace a water pump on a 2002 Chevy Suburban. This will be the same process for any 2000 through 2006, and if you also have a 2007 Classic Silverado, these motors are pretty much all the same. It's pretty much just any LS motor. This particular motor is a 5.3 motor. This will work also for the 6.0 liters, the LQ4s, LQ9s, LS1s, LS3s, etc., etc. They're all very much pretty similar. Obviously, these motors are in different cars. This particular one is in a Suburban. So, like I said, you could figure it out. Suburbans, Yukons, Yukon XLs, Sierras, Silverados, Corvettes, etc. So, obviously you need to, if you're working on a car, you need to jack it up and drain the radiator. I've already started draining the radiator on this car. I'll leave a picture here to show you where the drain plug is at. It's on the driver's side on the lower part of the radiator. I can't really get a good angle out of here, but it's not on the very bottom of the radiator. It's somewhat a little bit up. If I was pointing at the radiator, and you know the radiator square is here, it's somewhere in this area down here. But like I said, I'll leave you a picture pointing to where it's at. You'll probably have to use pliers to loosen it up, and I wouldn't suggest opening it all the way because a whole bunch of coolant comes out all at once. So what I do is take the coolant reservoir cap off completely, then I just crack it open and I kind of just let it drip out slowly. You could go faster by taking it all the way out, but that's just a big giant mess. So you can see already I did make a little bit of mess. But after you get that all drained out, leave your drain pan down there, because when you pull the water pump off, some more coolant will also come out, as well as when you pull off the upper and lower radiator hoses, some more coolant will probably come out as well. So just leave that handy, so that way you don't spill coolant all over the place. Fortunately, coolant doesn't stain, so you can just rinse it off with water. But yeah, you just leave that there for now. So we'll get right into it. You'll need pretty basic tools for this. I always find that when I tell you guys what tools you need in the beginning of my videos, it turns out that I need something else, so I'm not going to do that now. You'll just need some basic hand tools, a set of pliers. The only tool, I'll always try to point out the tools you may not have. You will need a fan, excuse me, a fan removal tool, so that you can take the cooling fan, excuse me, so you can take the cooling fan off. There is a bolt down there that you need to hold. You need to hold the pulley of the fan while you break it loose. I'll get more into that when we get there. So for now, we'll go ahead and start disassembling the front of the motor, so that way you can get to the water pump. Okay, the first thing you'll need to do is to remove loosen the two hose clamps that are holding on the air box. Right down here where it connects to the air box, there's an 8mm right here. You don't need to loosen it all the way, just enough to pull the hose off. Same over here, there's an 8mm right here in front of this that you need to loosen and take off. Also, there is the hose right here connects to a clamp that's attached to this air box. What I like to do is to not loosen the clamp, but you can just stick a screwdriver right in here and just pry the hose right out of the hole that it sits in, so that when you remove this intake, the hose doesn't want to come with it. Same right here, there is a clamp right here you can just pull this up and get it up out of the hole there. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen up the 8mm. Then you'll need to use a screwdriver flathead to stick in here. Go in just enough so you can pry the hose off of the air box. Then pretty much you just lift this up, tilt it up, and tilt this forward to get it up off of the throttle body. You can just set this down. So the next thing we need to tackle is removing the fan shroud up here on top. If you look down around the perimeter, follow this, the whole thing down to where it meets the bottom half. There are push pins that you need to loosen. They pretty much look like these right here, and you would just stick a screwdriver directly into them and pry them up, and then you can go ahead and remove them. There are 4 total. This car only has 2. Someone didn't put the other ones back, but there's one here on the edge, and then there's another one on this side. So there's 2 on this side and 2 on this side. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull those off now. You need a 10mm socket so that you can loosen up the 2 10mm bolts. There's one right here, and there's one on the other side that are holding the top of the fan shroud in. You can loosen and remove them. Okay, now after you've done that, you pretty much can lift the shroud up out of here. You'll have to move this hose back out of the way so that you can lift the shroud out, and then you can just set it to the side. Okay, so after you got the fan shroud out of the way, you can go on ahead and remove the upper radiator hose. You can disconnect the little hose that's attached. You can just take it off the clamp and you can just leave this hanging on the side for now, because you don't need to do anything else with it. The upper radiator hose is held on by 2 clamps. This clamp here and the clamp that's attaching it to the radiator. So I will go ahead and remove that. Okay, after you got the hose off, you can go ahead and set it down on the side. So now the next thing you need to do is to remove this fan. Now there are tools that you can use, a special tool called the fan removal tool. Pretty much there's various types, but pretty much it'll hold this pulley right here in place while you break the fan loose. So this one is going to be just your normal bolt direction, right tight, left loose. So you'll want to be spinning the fan loose, left to loosen it up. If you want to go out and rent the tool, or maybe you already have a tool, there are holes inside this pulley right here where the tool will stick bolts into those holes, and it'll hold this pulley tight while you loosen this up. What I've always done for many years is pretty much take a wrench. I believe this is a 1 7/16. This should be, I think, a 32mm nut that's on here. So very much I take this and stick it on. I don't take the serpentine belt off. Leave the serpentine belt on because you need that extra resistance. And pretty much you'll stick this on here and spin it around till you have it up here at the top. And what you'll do is take a hammer and you'll just hit this here wrench as hard as you can, as fast as you can, and that usually will break the nut free, and then you don't have to go out and rent a tool. Obviously if you rent a tool, they'll give you your money back when you're done with it, but if you don't want to go drive anywhere, this is the way I would suggest trying first. Now if you don't have a wrench this big, obviously you'll want to go rent a tool. If you do have a wrench this big, then try to just give this a whirl first and see if it works for you. It may not work for you, and then you'll need to get the tool. So you just give it you just hold it, give it one good whack like that, and then it'll break it free, just like it just did here. After you break it free, you're pretty much just gonna spin it off until it comes off of the water pump pulley, and then you can just set the fan down to the side. Be careful that you don't drop the fan and it punctures your radiator, so make sure you keep a good hold on it. And then you can just take the fan out. Okay, so now you need to remove the serpentine belt. There's a tensioner right here. That's a 15mm nut. You pretty much just take a breaker bar and pull the breaker bar to your right or towards the driver's side, and that will take the tension off the belt so that you can remove the belt. There, you got it on there. You just pull it down just like that, and then that allows enough tension to be taken off so you can remove the belt. Do remember how the belt went on. Take a picture if you need to. Some cars have belt diagrams, like most of these trucks. They're right here on this plastic piece. There's a belt diagram, but if it's not there, make sure you take a picture so you remember how to put it on. Then you could just remove the belt entirely. This is a good time to replace the serpentine belt if yours is bad. This one is still in pretty good shape, so I'm going to go ahead and reuse it. Now you can tell the reason this truck had a problem is because this water pump pulley is really loose. The bearing is bad. You could probably, I don't know if you can hear it in the video, but the bearing is bad and it's very loose. So now this is pretty much, this is the entire water pump here. Next thing we'll need to do is to remove the lower radiator hose from the thermostat housing, and then you'll also want to remove the two heater hoses that get connected. You also want to remove those off of the side of the water pump. They're just held on by hose clamps, so do have a drain plug or drain pan underneath so you can catch the coolant that's going to fall. But you want to remove these three hoses, and then we can go on ahead and remove the water pump. So I'm going to take off these three hoses now. Okay, so now that you got the hoses off, the lower radiator hose and the two heater hoses, depending on which water pump you got, yours may have came with the new thermostat. Some of them do not come with the new thermostat, or maybe you chose to purchase a new thermostat. Regardless of the situation, you'll have to take this thermostat housing here off. It's held on by two 10mm bolts. Be careful when you do this because more coolant will come out, but this is here the thermostat itself, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that now so that I can get it cleaned up and ready to transfer over to the new one. It may be a little stuck on there, so you're going to have to either tap it or use a flathead screwdriver to kind of get it to break loose. This one already is leaking out coolant, so as I said, there's still going to be coolant that comes out. So this is the actual thermostat housing. This is a thermostat in here. I didn't have a problem with this thermostat, so I'm going to go ahead and just reuse it. I'll just make sure that I clean the surface around this. Be careful because there is a rubber O-ring in here, so don't cut that. But yeah, you can just take this now and just set it off to the side. You'll be using it a little bit later on the reinstall. And you'll also have to transfer this tensioner pulley. You'll have to transfer that over to your new water pump as well. This is held on by three 15mm bolts. There's two right here you can see, and then there's one that's hiding underneath the pulley. So you can go on ahead and take those off and just set the tensioner pulley down to the side for now. There you go, you have the pulley off. So the two longer, there will be a long bolt on the bottom, a long bolt on the top, and then the bolt right here is a short bolt. So that way you don't get confused with where they go. Okay, so now pretty much you're ready to take the water pump off. The water pump is held on by 10mm bolts. There are, let me see how many there are. I believe there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bolts that hold it on. There are 3 right here on the front, and then 3 right here underneath the water inlet here. So you can go ahead and loosen those up. Keep in mind more coolant is going to come out, so place your drain pan where you need to. You'll probably spill some on the ground, but no worries. So you can go ahead and loosen and remove those bolts, and then you can go ahead and pull the water pump off. Okay, now that you got the water pump off, what you'll need to do now is to clean up the area where you're going to be reinstalling the new water pump. You'll see there's an outlet there, and there's one, excuse me, that's hiding there on the underside. You need to take what I take is a razor blade, and I just run it across the surface of where the new gasket's going to go, to make sure you don't have any leaks later on. I also use black silicone, RTV silicone. What I do is run I'll clean all that off real good, and then I'll run a bead around the perimeter of both of those, the square hole and the round hole on both sides. And then I'll do the same on the new water pump. I'll put a small bead onto the water pump, and then I'll put the gasket on top of that so it's kind of stuck to it, and then I'll install the water pump on there. So pretty much I have a bead of silicone on the water pump and a bead of silicone here on the block. So I'm going to go ahead and get this cleaned up, and then I'll go on ahead and install the new water pump. And just take your time with it, try not to rush. Make sure that all the old gasket stuff is off of here as best as you can get it off, and that way you can make sure you have a nice clean seal and you won't have any water leaks later on. As you can tell, this thing has oil covering it everywhere. That's probably bad valve cover gaskets, but that's not my job today. So I'm going to go ahead and get this cleaned up so we can put the new water pump on. Just point something out real quick. Your new water pump should come with a new thermostat gasket. It'll come with either a paper gasket that's flat, or it'll come with a rubber O-ring. You'll just have to match your existing thermostat, because some thermostats don't use the rubber O-ring and some do. So this one that I have in here used the rubber O-ring. I actually picked it out. It goes around here, so I'm going to go ahead and stick the new one in there. Then I'll run a bead of silicone on the water pump side, just a small bead, and then stick that in there and let it set. So that way I don't have any leaks there. I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so after you've got the surface cleaned off on the block, you can go on ahead and install a bead of silicone. Just a small bead around both of them. I will show you in a picture here how it should look like. Some people choose not to use silicone. That's entirely up to you. I use it because it's extra insurance that it's not going to leak when I'm done. So put the silicone there on the block like I showed, and you'll go on ahead and put silicone on the water pump and install the gaskets, as I will show you now as well. And then you'll go on ahead and reinstall the water pump back onto the block. Start all the bolts by hand, trying to hold the water pump as steady as you can. That way you get all the bolt holes lined up correctly and you don't disturb the silicone too much. And then you will have to go on ahead and torque down the water pump. The first pass will be 11 foot-pounds, so torque all of them to 11 foot-pounds. And then after that, you're going ahead on the final pass. The second pass is 22 foot-pounds. So if you don't have a torque wrench, you certainly can buy one. I would say go ahead and try and do this by hand, but it's aluminum bolts, so just be careful. So I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the water pump now. Okay, that was the first pass. You've probably already noticed I've already installed the thermostat housing as well. That one you can just put the new gasket on that came in your new water pump, and run a bead of silicone around it also, just like you did the water pump. And go ahead and just hand tighten that one. You don't have to go too crazy on that one as well. I believe the torque for that is probably around 11 or 15 foot-pounds as well. So I'm going to go ahead and make the second pass now, which is 22 foot-pounds for the water pump. Okay, now that you've got the water pump torqued down correctly, you can go ahead and pretty much now we're just going to be reinstalling the stuff that we took off. The first thing I want to do is put the 3 hoses back on, the lower radiator hose and the 2 heater hoses. Put those on, put the hose clamps on, and we can go from there. Okay, after you've got the 3 hoses attached on the bottom, you can go on ahead and reinstall the tensioner pulley, which sets right here with the 3 15mm bolts. Remember that the shortest bolt goes on the very bottom of this tensioner. You just get these nice and snug. It is aluminum, so they don't need to be very tight. Okay, after you got that on, now you can go on ahead and reinstall the serpentine belt. Just make sure you either reference a picture you took, or you can use the little diagram that's here attached to this plastic shield. You use the one that's for V8 motors, obviously. There is one also for diesel engines, so we're not following that one. You will need to use a 15mm to take the tension off the pulley, so that way you can get the belt all the way around. Make sure when you put the belt on that all of the ridges are lined up correctly and that it's all seated correctly where it needs to be at, so that way you don't ruin your belt. Okay, now what we can do is go on ahead and reinstall the upper radiator hose. Okay, once you got the upper radiator hose back on, you can go on ahead and reinstall the fan. Well, I guess you should have probably put the fan on first before you put this radiator hose on, but either way, there's plenty of room here to put the fan on. You gotta take your time. You gotta probably hold it in the front and start to spin it slowly, that way it can start onto the threads. Remember, you're spinning it to the right to tighten it up. Then you go on ahead and either use the fan removal tool that you had. You can use that to tighten it up pretty tight, or you can do like I did with the hammer and the wrench and stick the wrench back on and then just give it a pretty solid whack to the right so that it stays locked on. Now you can go on ahead and reinstall the upper fan shroud. Make sure that you locate it correctly onto the bottom one. There are little guide pins that you need to set it down on both sides, and then you can reinstall the plastic push pins that you used to, you can reinstall the plastic pins that you removed, and you can reinstall the two 10mm bolts that held it up top. Will take some maneuvering because you got the upper hose, but it goes in easily. You can reinstall the hose back down into the hole that's here, and then the last thing you'll need to do is to reinstall the intake tube. First, you'll need to stick this part onto the throttle body. You have to pay attention to this side of the airbox, the other long side that goes down into the engine bay some. Make sure that you keep the intake level as you're sticking it in there, and then you can start pushing onto the top of the throttle body, and then kind of push the intake on that way. And then over here on this side, there is a hose that comes out of the coolant reservoir. That hose, the bigger hose that's on the back, goes on top of the intake tube, not below it. And then also right here in the other clip that holds on the upper radiator hose, you go ahead and push that back into the hole it came out of. And don't also, I forgot to mention the little hose that we removed. Actually, let me pull this off now because I've been messed up. There's the little hose that runs underneath the intake. You need to position that back onto its clamp. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. This little guy here, this little hose, it runs underneath the intake, and it gets clipped onto the upper radiator hose clip as well. Then you can go on and put the intake on. Sorry about that. Then you go ahead and tighten up the two 8mm clamps that hold the intake tube. And now you'll go on ahead and just refill the reservoir with the correct GM dexcool coolant, which is orange. You'll probably need a couple gallons, but pretty much just fill it up, keep filling it up, and squeeze these hoses at the same time, especially the lower radiator hose, to facilitate the air bubbles to get out of there. These usually don't have issues with these trucks with burping the coolant systems and bleeding them out. They usually do a very good job on their own. But yeah, you'll fill this up, pretty much keep it filled to where it's set, to where the seam of the reservoir is. You'll see it says cold fill. Keep it filled up above that. Just pour the coolant in pretty much until it will take no more. Then go inside and turn the heater all the way to hot on the main settings. If you have rear AC or rear heat controls up above your head, then go on ahead and turn those all the way to hot as well. Turn the fan speeds on both of them to about 3 or 4, and then go ahead and start the engine and let the engine idle, check for leaks, and then you'll go on ahead and as the engine's running and coming up to temperature, keep an eye out on the reservoir to make sure that you are refilling it with coolant or topping it off as it's needed, because the engine will suck some of it in as it's running and the water pump's moving it around. So just keep an eye on it. You also want, after about, I don't know, probably after about 7 to 10 minutes, you should have pretty decent heat coming out of the vents. If not, just wait a little bit longer. Make sure you check it out. Just make sure you top it up and keep the reservoir full, so that way there's no air bubbles that are getting in there. But that's pretty much it for water pump replacement on any of these LS based engines, the Gen 3 and Gen 4 LS engines. They're all very common. Water pumps go out often on these, so, and luckily they're fairly easy to do. So if you have any questions or comments, ask them in the comment section below. If this is your first time to the channel, I appreciate you stopping by, and I'd like to see more of you, so definitely hit the like button, share this with your friends if it was helpful, and don't forget to check out my page for any other content. I do have some videos on these Chevys because they do have common problems, such as the quick disconnects for the heater hose lines, so I do have a video for that as well. But nonetheless, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on the way out, and thanks for watching.